Good morning. Thank you, Bill. I am delighted to be here to help kick off today's meeting, not only because this is a priority for FDA's medical device program, but because it reflects a true collaboration within and across the medical device community to get us to where we are today. I'm going to talk about FDA's medical device program, Patient Preference Initiative, just to put in context what we're doing at the agency and how the work we're going to talk about today fits into it. And everything we do for our priorities stems from our vision, which I put up here, and it begins, patients in the U.S. have access to high-quality, safe, and effective medical devices of public health importance first in the world. And you'll notice the very first word in our vision is patients. That's intentional, because patients are at the heart of who we are and what we do. Improving the health and the quality of life of patients is at the core of our mission to protect and promote public health. But the issue is, what's the role of patients? And historically, and even today, we deal in much more of a paternalistic society. Years ago, certainly decisions were always made by the practitioner, and the patient was told, here's what we're going to do to take care of you. But then over time, patients started to form into advocacy groups to kind of push for access to new medical products, particularly in the setting of emerging diseases like HIV. And with the internet, we have the explosion of the information age. When all that information is out there, patients becoming empowered to ask better questions and start to push to engage in more shared decision-making. But now the next step, which is not the future but here today, is a role of patients in regulatory decisions, not just about what treatments are out there or diagnostics that they could then choose from options, but having a say on which of those products get on the market in the first place. That's a little bit of what we're talking about. Now, the role of patients from a regulatory standpoint can be all across the total product life cycle. I'm just going to highlight only a few of the places where the patient's voice can be critical. So first off, just on the development side, for a medical device, understanding the needs of patients to be able to take that into account in the development and the modifications of devices. Patient perspectives coming into play, on clinical trial design, informing what are the outcomes, the measures that are important to patients that reflect what's important to them, and factoring that into clinical trials. Of course, their perspective on benefits and risks when we are making approval decisions. And of course, when we're conveying information about benefit risks or other material, taking into account what's the best way for them to understand that information and for that information to be conveyed. As Bill mentioned, our first formal articulation of the importance of the voice of the patient in our pre-market review came in our benefit risk guidance, which we put out in final form in 2012. And it explicitly says, here are the factors for benefit, here are the factors for risk, here are the factors for weighing the two. And one of the critical factors to take into account where appropriate is patients' tolerance for risk and perspective on benefit. And just a few months later, Congress and the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Improvement Act, FDAIA, also called upon the agency to solicit the views of patients during the medical product development process and consider the perspectives of patients during regulatory discussions. And so we kicked off a Patient Preference Initiative. And the goal here is to find ways to elicit, measure, and incorporate the voice of patients into our regulatory decision-making and to advance the science behind it, patient-centered science. And that's much of the work that we're going to talk about. Here are just some of the things that we're doing in our Patient Preference Initiative. So on the one hand, much of today will be around the work that we have done collaboratively as a part of MDIC around the framework for product developers for taking into consideration patient preference all throughout the total product life cycle, as well as a catalog of tools that might be tailored in specific cases to better understand what are patient preferences in making choices about particular technologies. And then we today have now released our first draft guidance on patient preferences, this one in the setting of pre-market submissions, and how we would factor in patient preferences in our decision-making. And then we're going to talk about a particular case study where we've already been using this kind of information. And so you can think about there are a number of settings in trade-offs on benefit and risk. And it's easy when the benefits, you know the benefits are high, the risks are very low, patient preference may not come into play very much of a role, but in other settings, patient preference can be highly informative as to whether or not that product should go on the market. And in the guidance we put out today, we start to talk about this. And so first off, the use of patient preference information is voluntary. And none of this is changing the standard, right? So this guidance focuses on benefit risk determinations for PMAs and de novos. And the standard there, reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness, doesn't change. The real issue isn't about benefit and risk, but how do you weigh the benefit and the risk, and whose voice matters in that decision-making. And in the guidance, we start to lay out what is patient preference information. What are sort of the factors to take into account to assuring that if we are assessing patient preferences, we're getting sufficiently robust data that we have valid scientific evidence that we can rely on it to make regulatory decisions, and then we give a number of examples. And patient preference information kind of comes in two flavors. There's a qualitative side that can be very informative for what might be the outcomes and the measures and the endpoints that are informative about what matters to patients. But then there are quantitative aspects as well, and that can be used for informing decision-making. So what could that look like? Well, normally when we think about looking about a technology, first off, is there any benefit, right? If there's no benefit, that technology, that device should not be on the market. If there is a benefit, now it's a question of do the benefits outweigh the risks? And traditionally, that's a decision that we at the FDA make, solely based upon our subjective values. In some cases, we've tried to do quantitative benefit risk determinations, but most of the time we're really talking about it. There's that element of subjectivity. But technologies are used on or in patients. So if it turns out that we may feel that the risks outweigh the benefits, or it's a very tough call, but there's a clearly identifiable patient population, subpopulation, for whom that technology would be indicated, and they have a different value preference, they think the benefits outweigh the risks, then we would approve that device. But in doing so, we would make clear this is a technology for use in a particular patient population defined by not just the disease maybe that you're treating or the demographics of that person, but the value choices that they make. Put that information out there and then let practitioners and patients make better formed decisions on whether or not that technology is right for them. That's what we're talking about, and then put that information in the labeling and maybe in other forms to make it more useful. And as I mentioned, this is something that we're in fact doing today. So we had worked with RTI on developing a survey tool to assess preferences of patients with obesity. And it was these binary choices, trade-offs in benefit and risk. An incredibly informative survey, and the results were very informative to us, and we've now published the results of those findings. In fact, we have used the information out of that survey to help inform our decision to approve the Enteromedics Maestro device, which was the first device to treat obesity that we have approved since 2007. So it's something we're already doing today. Now the question is, how can we do this more systematically? We also have used that information to develop a decision aid tool for our review staff that they can use as they are looking at treatments for obesity. So as we look forward, this is a top priority for us. We remain committed to it. What you're hearing about today is merely one of the steps along the way. We will continue to look at the different parts of the total product life cycle and how we can incorporate the patient voice into the various pieces along the way from concept out onto the market and then maintaining on the market. And you'll continue to see this work going forward. So again, absolutely delighted we've made it to today's workshop, and thank you for coming.